there's a plan that's bigger than you, and you may not understand it right now, but I think the biggest thing is being grounded and being, rooted in something bigger than yourself. The first time I got on the phone and spoke to Coach Belichick, obviously, it's surreal, right? The perspective of me as a little kid watching the Patriots and watching all the success that, he had leading that organization. It was, probably the biggest reason I'm here, to be honest, right? To get a chance to be under him, get coached by him, learn from him. Like you said, obviously the head coach and quarterback have a very close-knit relationship. Their communication is important to the success of the team and the success of the offense and all those things. So it was a big factor for me. It was a big factor for me. I'd be lying if I said it wasn't.
What is it that he saw in your game that made him want to make you quarterback at North Carolina? Because obviously I had to watch tape from Maryland. You didn't get much from Wisconsin, but you showed a lot out there. But what was it that he saw that made him excited about bringing you on board? Because he knows football way better than I ever will.
Just trying to remember the one conversation or one of our first conversations about it. I think just the ability for me to get the ball to the playmaker's hands, right? He made a joke or he made a comment, the same thing that he was like, I told Tom Brady the same thing. If, we got to watch Tom Brady run, 90 yards up and down the field, it's going to be a long game. It's going to be, not the most fun watch. And he said the same thing to me, which, obviously I'm confident in who I am as a player. I know my strengths. I also know my weaknesses. And I, 100% agreed. I think his, kind of breakdown, obviously coming from, his mouth and his perspective of my game, I think, matched a lot of what I think in my head in terms of what I'm good at. And, what I think I can handle as a quarterback at the line, with the system we're running and, all the stuff that they kind of put on the quarterback's plate. I think just match up with what I was looking for in order to be challenged and continue to grow. And, my 6th year, I know I'm in my 6th year and, I have a year or two of some playing time. But I think there was more growth that I was looking for in my 6th year, right? If I'm going to come back and, be a 6th year and get the medical red shirt, like how much more can I get out of myself? So that was a big reason, with the conversations I had with him and what he saw in me and kind of what, his vision per se was for me. That was, it was everything kind of I wanted to hear when going through that portal process, obviously, because it goes pretty quick.
When you're getting this chance to play for a absolutely historic coach in kind of the remainder of last season, how did you get through that process when you weren't able to play the whole season? You didn't know if you were going to get another year. What helped you push through that? Because I have to imagine that was really challenging because now it looks great, but there were moments last year where there were probably days you woke up and questioned whether you're ever going to play football again, right?
Yeah, it was tough. It was tough. The recovery process was tough. Just, there were good days, bad days, and, there was like some kind of up and down, just up and down days throughout the rehab process. And I think probably the biggest thing, I've played football for much of my life. I've had injuries, but, never an injury to the extent of, okay, maybe it's, looking like a longer recovery where it's going to be a couple months. And I think mentally that was probably the hardest thing for me in the beginning is like realizing like, it's not going to be a linear, rehab and kind of recovery plan to getting back to feeling good and feeling like you can go out there and play, but also it is going to take time. And that was, something that was hard for me in the beginning. I don't think I knew that. And I think when I finally realized that, it was like, okay, my mindset's got to change in terms of just attacking it one day at a time, but it was tough.
When you did have to face, because there were definitely days you did, we had to face football might be over. And that's scary when you put so much work into something. How has that made you a better football player now as you got to the spring? Because I think sometimes facing that something could be the end ultimately makes you better at it when you do get that next opportunity.
Just making sure I have a greater appreciation for the game and not taking anything for granted. And honestly, coming here to UNC, I think we signed about 35 guys out of high school. So our team, is relatively young, and being around a bunch of guys that are, 17, 18, 19 years old and are just kind of getting into this thing, I think has given me, a greater perspective of what the game has done for me.
Coach Belichick signing so many freshmen has to speak to how he must be awfully energized and in this for the long haul when you're putting that many freshmen on your roster.
Oh yeah. He shows up every day. It's been really fun. He always, keeps us on our toes and really, with all the team meetings and all the interactions and time you get to spend with him just being coached by him, you realize that, it's the secret isn't just, the process. We every day in the spring or, in between we practice Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday, usually on the Monday, Wednesday, Fridays, or maybe on a practice day here and there, he's thrown up, Nick Saban, Kurt Cignetti, Greg Popovich, all, just some of the greatest coaches to ever do it. And the message is the same with all of them. And that's the same one he shares with us about the process and making sure we continue to take the right steps, the necessary steps at the right time and stuff. So it's been really fun. It's definitely something, 16-year-old me, if you told me that at some point in my college career that, Bill Belichick would be my coach, I obviously would not believe you. So that's another reason, just for me to fully be present where I'm at and just make the most of this opportunity.
Who are some of the cooler people you've gotten to meet? I have to imagine some cool people have stopped by, practices, etc.
There's been a few. Randy Moss came to one of the spring practices. I believe Lawrence Taylor was up there. Yeah, there's always, you never know with Coach. Coach is always, there's not every day, not often, but every once in a while there'll be someone in there that pops up and you're like, whoa. But, Coach obviously has a long history of coaching the game and, at the NFL level, and he's made a lot of great connections. And a lot of people speak, very highly of him when they come back and talk about their stories of, yeah, I just sat here and watched Coach Belichick and listened to Coach Belichick tell you guys X, Y, and Z. He said the same thing to me, 25 years ago, sort of thing. So it's been cool. It's been fun, just like I said, to be in the environment, to be around Coach and to get the opportunity to learn from him and be coached by him has made it a lot of fun.
You have another legendary coach on your staff with Petrino running your offense. You guys running fast?
Oh yeah. We're doing a mix of both, and we're trying to be multiple enough to where we can have enough things in the bag to throw at defenses and whatnot. But it's been really fun. Again, that's another thing of from the day one when I got here and we're first learning that offense to maybe it's a little bit tricky to learn, obviously, right when they throw a lot of stuff at you out on day one and stuff. And I think this is my fourth or fifth offensive coordinator or, system that I've been in. So I kind of enjoy that challenge of looking at it of like, again, from where I've been from January to now, or even practice one in spring to now, it's been a lot of fun. And the thing with Coach P is, he's always keeping you on your toes. We're always getting deeper into plays. Oh, we already watched this play. We already watched this clip. Okay, well, this is the calculus level to this play. And this is what we ran back in 1999. Like, he has great recall to be able to sit back there and talk about, oh, well, if we get this next time, we're doing this. This was good on this play, but if we get this look, if that dude just moves by, half a body, this is our adjustment to it. So it's been really fun, and just to continue to get coached by them and, watch myself grow and watch everybody else grow in the quarterback room. And, a lot of our young guys on the team has been really cool to be a part of. And I think we're all looking forward to the opportunity to start camp here soon, to go out and, kind of show the strides and the progress that we've made from the end of spring.
Who are guys they do show you tape on when they're trying to kind of work with you? Because between the two coaches, pretty large library of players they've.
Yeah, you can pick the poison. There's obviously, with Coach Petrino and obviously he was with Taylor Green at Arkansas, who, was really successful in the SEC running that offense. Then the Lamar Jacksons, and there's a lot of old kind of, we always give him a hard time, grainy clips from Arkansas, where he has those have to be in the early 2000s, or I don't know. People make jokes because people say I'm probably the only one in the quarterback room that was alive when these football games were filmed, because we got, a bunch of other young guys in the room. And then obviously with Coach Belichick, Tom Brady, a lot of the successful NFL guys, Matt Stafford, we'll watch a good amount in there. Today we were watching some Drew Brees and his ability with, hitting the checkdowns at the top of his drop and rhythm, or hitting screens. Just really, with them and their experiences they've had, there's really, they're not handcuffed into watching one guy. But I think, a lot of the guys that they watch, it's because they have experiences with them. They've either coached against them, played against them, coached them. So that, there really could be anybody that pops up on the film room, tape, cut up tape, teach tape for the day, which makes it more fun. There's a lot of good players that, have played the game that they've coached or they played against or know. So it always, there's little things to take away from all the guys they've showed us.
What is it? It's actually a question I'd ask. Like, what is it you take away from watching Lamar Jackson and Taylor Green tape? Because, there's a lot of attributes you got, but I don't think, unless I'm missing something, I don't think you're quite as fast as those two guys.
Yeah, Lamar Jackson did a great job of, speeding up his hands and his feet in quick game and RPOs and stuff. Taylor Green had great touch on the ball. We were watching, the Ole Miss game with him, and I think last year, where they lost, narrowly in a shootout, and just his ability to be efficient in the pass game. It's 3rd and 7. They're at the probably plus 35. Let me just plug it on the little hitch route, and it's 4th and 2 now. Now we can go for it and get it, with a run to the left side. Little stuff like that where, yes, they may be, have different physical attributes than me when it comes to, playing the game and what kind of, they're going to be hanging their hat on at the end of the day.
But on the Drew Brees front, that's got to be a great guy for you to watch, because that's someone that's got to be ultra inspirational in the sense that Brees was a player who, one of the big ways he became one of the greatest quarterbacks in NFL history is his football IQ. And that's probably the trait that I feel like you bring to the table probably above everything else in your game.
Yeah, absolutely. His ability to play in rhythm with his feet and get the ball to the check down and just, always making the right decision. I think, like you said, he wasn't the most physically gifted guy. He didn't have the strongest arm. He was, on the shorter end of quarterbacks, but the way he played the game and his pre-snap process of, I think there was one day in spring where we're talking about making a check or whatever, we're expecting for the day of these are our checks for the day. And, we pulled up a clip of Brees making a check, and Brees is bending down behind the offensive line so the defense can't see the signal, and he's, signaling out chop or whatever to the receivers like that. You may laugh at it the first time you watch it, but like as a quarterback watching another quarterback, you understand, the process and everything that went into, why he was able to be successful and why he was able to have such a long career. And like I said, you try to take as much from the film as you can and the coaching points that they're giving you and, see how you can transfer it over to your own game.
When I remember Brees, he was just so effortless is the word that comes to mind. He was doing so much brutally challenging stuff, and he made it always look so easy, which was incredible.
Always fluid, at least from the tape. You could tell he rehearsed before the games. I remember hearing a story. I forget where this came from, but I know it was within the last year and a half or so of, he had a preseason game. And obviously he wasn't playing. This was, on the back half of his career, but he went out there and ran a 70 play script and, was going through all his check downs, his reads and stuff. And you just saw kind of, the monster that he was in terms of his process and what he was going to do day in and day out to, give himself a chance to be successful out there, which obviously, he had a lot of success throughout his career. So kind of his process worked, and it's different for everybody, but I think there's a lot, like you said, I think there's a lot from his process that I could take for myself or that I do take for myself in terms of going out there and mentally being able to, you're going to prepare mentally to win the game before you even step out there. That way, when you go out there, you know what you're seeing, the checks, your answers, you're able to play fast. And then from there, it's just, you're just like throwing the pigskin around in the backyard when you're a little kid. It's, you try to make it as simple and as easy as possible.
Last thing I got for you is, you had a moment last year was about as scary as it can get for a quarterback. You're in your last year and it all crashed down on you way, way, way too early at Wisconsin. But what advice would you give to somebody else who finds themselves in a similar situation? Might not even be football, where just they think the worst case scenario has happened and you didn't know that you were going to get this chance at that point. So what advice would you give to someone who's in that spot where it feels like they've had that worst case scenario moment and the future just seems completely uncertain in that moment?
One, I think you have to have a good support system, but two, I think the biggest thing for me was just, in all honesty, trusting God's plan. I think, I remember obviously my parents were there at the game. They stayed with me. They went home, a couple days, maybe the Friday or Saturday after I got hurt. And my dad had mailed me, some stuff in the mail, some of these bracelets. Let me see if I can get them out of the way so you can see. Has hope and power on it and just some Bible verses, those two bottom ones there. And, in the note, in the little letter he wrote me of just sometimes there's a plan that's bigger than you and you may not understand it right now in terms of why it's happening or what's happening. And that's okay. That's part of it. But I think the biggest thing is being grounded and being, rooted in something bigger than yourself. Having belief in something bigger than yourself. And at the end of the day, that's one part of it. But I think at the end of the day, it's now going out there and working for it. Cause, there's been like anybody that's had, a knee injury or a big injury, there's obviously moments of doubt and whatnot. But I think if you just, again, I'm starting to sound repetitive here, but I think when you look at the process of, all right, August 29th, my immediate process was like, all right, how am I going to come back from this? How am I going to, whether it's I return to play next week or takes me 6 months, whatever it is, how am I going to continue to take the necessary steps? And I think, my ability to do that and to continue to do that, I have, been through the support system I have, the friends, family, teammates, helped me a lot last year. There was a lot of teammates that were in a similar spot, as me at Wisconsin that, as crappy as it sounds to say now, it obviously, helped us all out, that it wasn't just one guy singled out that, it had a season ending injury or it had a big injury. There was a lot of us that we were able to lean on at that time. But I think your support system, and I think your faith, I think just trusting that, it's all part of the plan. And, you may not understand it at the very moment, but there's, I think there's a lot of me that has grown and that have, I've learned a lot about myself throughout this process that I would not have gotten the opportunity to learn about myself or go through and grow, through kind of some struggles had I not had this knee injury. So it's tough. I think my advice would just be to lean on the people around you, and I think have faith.